To those who are good.
Continue, okay.
Welcome to those who are in Boca. Oh, here the list. Harold Katz, Bruce Litfer, Dale Richard, good. Saul Schildhorn, good. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Alvin Rosenfeld, good to see you. Wonderful. Let me begin by saying good morning to those who are in Boca. Early good morning to those of you who are in Central States region, and very early good morning to those of you who are in California, and good afternoon if there's anybody here from Europe or from Israel. I'm delighted to see you all, and I feel honored that you've chosen to study the Book of Psalms with me this year. I hope you'll find this experience worthwhile, and that these words will speak to both your minds and your hearts. I must tell you that I need this class more than you do. Talmud says more than the calf needs the milk, the cow needs to give milk. And that's the way it is with teachers. If we have something to say and nobody listens to us, we feel terrible. So I'm glad that you're here for my sake, and I'm glad that you're here for your sake. Let me ask a question, and if you have the answer, you can shout it out or unmute. Can you name one psalm? Can you name one psalm? Yeah?
23rd Psalm. Hashem Rovi Below Echsor.
Good. Anybody else? I was sure that was the one that everybody could name.
Yeah.
Because that's the most famous one. All of us know it. All of us know it by heart. Jews and Christians appreciate it. That's the one song. And we'll, God willing, study it in this course. Let me begin by saying the bracha you're supposed to say when you study Torah, and join me if you know it. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has made us the holy people by means of your mitzvahs, and has commanded us to study the Torah. The reason I begin this way is to remind you and to remind myself that we're not just studying ancient literature. We're trying to recapture, if we can, the sense of holiness that the people who wrote these psalms felt when they wrote them. So I'm going to tell you that I begin this class with mixed feelings. On the one hand, I love the Psalms. How can you not love them? These are love songs written more than 2,000 years ago that have the power to speak to us today. And so I love them, and I'm eager to share them with you. But on the other hand, I'm a little bit reluctant to teach the Psalms for three reasons: two little ones and one big one. The first little reason is because we don't know who wrote them, or where, or when, or why. Whoever wrote the Psalms never signed their names and never dated them. That's very strange to us. We live in a world in which people somebody once said to me, if you want to give a sermon on humility, you got to elbow your way to the microphone. Everybody, I know a lot of rabbis who have public relations, people full-time on their staff. I know one rabbi of whom it used to be said that if he's named and appear in the New York Times for a whole week, he was sick. We hunger for publicity. Elvin, I don't know if you know who it is. If you guess, I'll deny it. We hunger for publicity. The people in the Second Jewish Commonwealth wrote anonymously. Who wrote the Nishmat? I don't know. Who edited the Haggadah? I don't know. Who arranged the Amidah? Nobody knows. I mean, these are gorgeous jewels. And yet, somebody who wrote them never signed his name. Could you do that? Could I do that? Could you write a great work of poetry anonymously? I don't think we could do that, but that's what they did. And so the first reason it's hard to teach the Psalms is we don't know who wrote them, when they wrote them, where they wrote them, why they wrote them. They're anonymous. In the whole period from the beginning of the Second Temple till the time of the men of the Great Assembly, it's a period of 300, 400 years, a creative period in which Judaism took shape. We don't have a single name, not one. Everybody was anonymous. But we'll get by. The second reason why I hesitate to teach these Psalms is we don't have the musical notes. We know they were sung by choirs. We know they were accompanied by orchestras, but we don't have the musical notes, like reading a libretto without a score. So we don't know when to stop. We don't know when a song is meant to be triumphant. We don't know whether it's past or present. We'll get by, but it's hard to read the Psalms without the musical notes. But the main reason it's hard to read the Psalms is because we read the Psalms. The people who wrote them poured out their hearts to God when they wrote these Psalms. They felt the presence of God. They felt joy and wonder and gratitude and anger and exultation. And above all, they felt the presence of God. Whereas we read the Psalms, forgive me for saying so, like we read the newspaper. We read them objectively with a dictionary and without passion. Let me not exaggerate. There are some times in our lives when everybody feels wonder and passion and anger. You remember how you felt at the moment when you held your newborn baby for the first time in your life? Remember how you felt? You had no words, you had such joy, such wonder, such glory. That's what the psalmist writes in the poem we're going to study about the birth of a baby. But the only difference between him and us is he could write about it and we don't. Did you ever feel a moment when you were angry at God, when you shook your fist at God? The psalmist felt that, except he wrote about it and we don't know how to write about it. Did you ever see the sunrise or the sunset or the Grand Canyon for the first time? You remember the sense of awe at the mystery of creation that you felt? That's what the psalmist felt. And so I think that there are, all of us, at some time in our lives, feel the emotions that the psalmist felt. I'm going to try to teach the Psalms at two levels, to the mind and to the heart. And if I just speak to the mind, I will not have got it. And if I just speak to the heart, I will not have got it. But let me try. Let me introduce you first to three people whose lives, without exaggeration, were changed by an encounter with the Psalms. First one is Paul Plotkin. Do you know that name? Paul Plotkin is a retired rabbi of a conservative congregation in Margate. And he tells this story. He says, there was a moment in my life when I was on the brink of suicide. I just couldn't handle all my problems anymore. My wife was divorcing me. My kids were going with their mother. And my congregation, those days, 20 years ago, congregations couldn't handle a rabbi who was divorced. It just, in those days, it was, it offended the congregation. So you felt, I'm going to lose my wife, I'm going to lose my children, I'm going to lose my job. I'm in my 40s, how am I going to get another job? What do I do? And he was in a state of shock and depression. He had gone to Europe with another couple, they loved to travel, and his wife had backed out at the last minute without saying why. And he told his friends what was going on. And the next morning he got up, and as he did every day, he started to daven, wallowing in self-pity. How could this be happening to me? Other people get divorced, not me. Other people lose their kids, not other people lose their, not me. And he got up to begin davening, put on his tallis, put on his tefillin, and then he said, wait a minute. Okay, Paul, it's put up or shut up time. All these years you told other people prayer is wonderful and prayer is important and prayer helps you and prayer is power. What about you? Is prayer going to help you? And so I davened as passionately as I could. And I'm used to rattling off the words a mile a minute, but this time was different. I didn't get very far, and I got to Psalm 30, one of the Psalms that we're going to study. And it says, I extol you, my God, for you lift me up. Huh? Lift me up? I could sure use some lifting up right now. I cried to you, O God, and you healed me. I was crying. Was God going to heal me? God, you brought me up from the depths. You kept me from going down into the pits. He's talking to God. The psalmist is talking to me. He's talking about me. I'm at the edge of the pit. I know the fear of falling in. He and I are alike. And then I came to the next line. At night, you go to sleep crying. In the morning, there is joy. There was an immediate change in my mood. A weight was lifted. A heaviness was gone. Like a banging headache that lingers till the time you feel it's going to go on forever and then stops. But I felt better. The cloud had missed it, had lifted. I felt no longer alone, no longer helpless. Sunshine had entered my life. I had received an answer, and there was going to be a future. I was going to get through this. And so I took my pen and I underlined that sentence. At night I cry, in the morning there'll be joy. In the days ahead, when the blues would strike me, when fear gripped me, I would return to that line. I would lose my negativity and I would stabilize myself for the events that life had in store for me. And then a strange thing happened. I was in a car with a friend of mine, and I told him my tzoros, and he told me his. And he said, you know, I've been looking for a verse that would keep me going, a verse I could use like in yoga, that I could say over and over again. And I found one. I said, really? What was it? He said, it was in Psalm 30. I cry at night, and in the morning there'll be light. Is that's the verse that you chose? Out of all the verses in the Bible, pull over and I'll show you something. He pulled over. I opened my siddur. He and I had the same verse. So that's one example of how the Psalms had the power to change a person's life. They kept him going. They kept him from suicide. Let me tell you the second story. You know the name of Anatol Sharansky? Anatol Sharansky is one of the heroes of modern Jewish life. And this is a fascinating story. He was a scientist in Russia in the 60s, back in the 1960s. He campaigned for the right of Jews to go to Israel, and for the right of other people in Russia to have free speech. And they arrested him. And he had a lady friend. Her name was Avital. And they were told, they had both applied for visas to Israel. And the KGB told them, she's going to leave get a visa to go to Israel on condition she leaves tomorrow morning. And you're going to go to jail tomorrow morning. They had one night to be together. They ran around town looking for a rabbi. They had never been in a synagogue in their lives. They somehow found a rabbi and he married them. And they spent their one night of married life together. In the morning, the KGB came to take her to a plane and take him to jail. They hugged and she gave him a present. He said, here's a copy of the Psalms in Hebrew and in Russian. And they parted. He spent, I think, 7 years in solitary confinement. Can you imagine 7 years in solitary confinement? You'd go crazy, I would. He did 3 things to keep himself sane. Number 1, he was a world-class chess player. So he played chess against himself without a board, and without peace. Imagine doing it, playing chess without a board. That's the kind of memory he had. He played chess to keep himself occupied. Second thing he did was every day he would tell the guards a anti-Soviet joke. And it would drive them crazy because if they laughed, they could get arrested. And it was funny, how could they not laugh? And the third thing he did was study the book of Psalms. Couldn't read Hebrew, but he read it in Russian. And he memorized it. And he learned Hebrew by the translation from Russian. Why? They took away the Psalms because they saw it was giving him so much pleasure. And then Avital went all around the world. She went to the Pope. She went to Congress. She aroused public opinion to let her husband go free. Finally, the Russians said, it's not worth keeping him. Look at all the publicity, bad publicity we're getting. So they decided to trade him for a Russian spy that the Americans had. And the deal was they were going to meet at a certain bridge in Berlin and make the transfer there. He said, I'm not going unless you give me my Psalms. The whole world is waiting. The media will be there. He's not going. So they gave him the Psalms. And then he said, walk straight across the bridge. So he zigzagged and walked this way because he wanted to show I'm a free man. You can't tell me what to do. And he held up the book of Psalms as he marched, as he zigzagged. He got there, his wife was waiting for him, the media was waiting for him, the government, Israel was waiting for him. They put him on a plane and flew him from Berlin to Tel Aviv. He got there and they put him in a car and they took him to the wall. And he got there and they put him on their shoulders. If you ever seen him, he's a very short man. They put him on their shoulders and they carried him to the wall. And he held up his thumbs at the wall. And that's how he came to Israel. So that's the story of a second example of how the Psalms changed a person's life. Let me tell you my story. And I tell you my story not because it's special, but because it's ordinary. I'm sure that what happened to me has happened to you as well. I once went to the doctor's in Boca. And at that time, the doctor's office was located right across the street from the hospital. Maybe 25, 30 feet from the hospital. I went for a regular checkup. Doctor gave me a couple of tests, reached for the phone and called for 911 and called for an ambulance. I said, what are you talking about? I'm okay. And if I have to go to the hospital, it's right across the street. I can walk, I can drive. He ignored me and called for an ambulance. And the ambulance came put me on a gurney, and drove me to the hospital. Drove me to pick me up again, took me through the ER. I didn't know what they're talking about. A cardiologist came and they took a couple more tests and said, "You're going to the operating room." I said, "Who, me? Why?" He said, "Don't be upset. First of all, it's only a procedure." I learned by now, when they get operated on, it's an operation. When you get operated on, they call it a procedure. And he said, "It's not going to hurt at all." He lied. It hurt plenty. He meant it's not going to hurt him at all. But that's the way doctors talk. The next thing I knew, they got me in a gown, these crazy, stupid gowns, and they put me on a gurney, and they start walking me to the right, pushing me to the operating room. I haven't got time to call my wife. I haven't got time to cancel my appointments. I got another 3-4 appointments that day, which are very important. No, they weren't. They got along without me. But at that moment, I couldn't call the office and I couldn't call the wife. I was being wheeled down the hall. What should I say? Instinctively, I don't know how it happened. Psalm 23 came to my mind. And I went down the hall saying to myself over and over and over again, watch it, I saw that. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He restores my soul. He guides me in straight. I kept saying it over and over and over and over again. And the doors opened and I went into the operating room and they lifted me from the gurney and put me on the table. And I saw Klieg lights and I saw the doctors getting ready and they gave me a shot to put me to sleep. And I still sang "The Lord is my shepherd." When I woke up, I'm still saying it. Why do I tell you that? Not because it's special, because I think that's normal. I think that you and I have probably had an experience like that. You ever been scared, terrified, worried, and said the Lord's song? That's what I did. So that's 3 random examples of how the 23rd Psalm has influenced people. Okay, you sure we can't have everybody introduce ourselves, Zena? You got too many? Zena, are you around?
Keep going, Rabbi.
I shouldn't have people introduce themselves?
Not right now. Are you finished?
No?
All right, we'll wait till you're finished.
Okay.
Okay.
Now I'm going to begin with Psalm 137. The reason I begin with this psalm is because it's one of the hardest psalms there is. If we can get through this one, we can get through any psalm. Okay? Psalm 137. You can look it up if you've got a psalm. If not, we'll manage. Let's see. It's a Bible. I don't see a Bible. I don't see the Bible. Oh, there, over there. So, can you reach for me? I got it. I got it. Everybody have a Bible? You can't sleep in a house without a Bible. Everybody got a Bible? Psalm 137. Let me read it to you in case you don't have it. And you'll recognize it when you hear the first 3 words. By the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept. Gotta find it. When we remembered Zion. Here it is. 108, 121, 135. Here it is. By the rivers of Babylon we sat and we wept. as we remembered Zion. There on the cypress trees, we hung up our lyres. I don't know what a lyre is. Does anybody know? I guess it's something like a harp. Our captors demanded from us songs of songs. Our tormentors wanted us to sing. Sing us one of the songs of Zion. How can we sing a song of the Lord on the foreign soil? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. Let my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth if I forget you. If I do not keep Jerusalem in my mind, even at the happiest hour. Remember God against the Edomites, the day of Jerusalem's fall. How they cried, stripper, stripper to her very foundations. And Babylon, you predator, blessed be the one who repays you for what you did to us. Blessings on whoever seizes your babies and crushes them against the rock. Ugh. The psalm is in two parts, 1 to 6, 7 and 9. The first part everybody loves. It is sung. How many of you have ever sung Al Narot Bavel? Raise your hands. Where did you sing it?
Before Birchat Hamazon during the week.
Good for you. Who said that?
Saul.
Good for you, Saul. Where else did you sing it?
On Tisha B'Av.
Good for you. If you ever went to a Jewish summer camp, you sang it on Tisha B'Av. Because it's a sad, mournful, tearful song. Used to sing it around the campfire, used to sing it in rounds. But you sang it on Tisha B'Av because it described what happened after Tisha B'Av. 586, before the Common Era, the temple got destroyed, burned to the ground, and the leaders, the elite, the Levites, the Kohanim, the best people in the country were taken away in exile to Babylon. And they sat by the rivers of Babylon and cried. It's found on camps. Beethoven set it to music. Bach set it to music. A composer in Detroit, whose name I forget, set it to reggae music. Everybody loves the first part. The second part, to put it mildly, is not loved. There are many people, Jews and Christians, who are really embarrassed by the last part. It is considered by some to be the most embarrassing passage in the whole Bible. At Vatican II, they issued a decree that Psalm 137 should no longer be part of the liturgy. Catholics shouldn't say it. How can you say it? How can you be religious, spiritual, compassionate, and sing a song asking God to throw babies' heads against the rocks? So the Vatican Council recently, back 50 years ago, outlawed the singing of the Psalm 137. The Anglican Church did the same thing. They outlawed the singing of Psalm 137. And Jews only sing it rarely. Saul pointed out a minute ago that it's sung before the grace after meals, on Shabbos, on the weekdays. I was surprised that anybody knew that, because we didn't do that in my house. We don't do that in my house. And I don't know very many people who do it, who sing it before the Birkat Hamazon. Shabbos we sing Shir Malach or Shavot Hashem V'Tzivateinu Hayilu Kachomim. We sing that Shir Malach before benching. But during the week, we don't sing Al Narot Bavel in many houses. But let's look at when there's one time we do sing it. Who knows when we do sing it? Who knows when we do sing it? Anybody?
Tisha B'Av.
Beside Tisha B'Av, one other time.
Oh,
One other time when it is sometimes sung. In Orthodox weddings, it is sometimes sung. I gave it away at the wedding. Okay, I'll come to why in a minute. Let's look at the text. First of all, we sat by the rivers of Babylon, not one, but plural. Babylon, today Iraq, is famous for its rivers. The most two famous ones are the Tigris and the Euphrates, right? But it has many, many other rivers, the land full of water. Whereas Israel, to this day, is a land with very little water. There's the Kinneret, Lake Galilee. There's the Jordan. You ever been to the Jordan? It's not a very big river. It ain't the Mississippi. And there's the Dead Sea. That's all. And therefore, Palestine was in those days, to some extent still in our days, a agricultural community. So it depended on rain. We talked about that on the break of Yom Kippur. Land depended on rain. Yoreh umalkosh. If there was rain, there was a harvest. If there was no rain, God forbid, there was no harvest. There was a drought. There was no crop. People would starve. Now, what does it mean when it says, by the rivers of Babylon, we sat and wept? It can mean one of three things. Even though this land has water and our land doesn't have water, nevertheless, we're homesick. We'd rather live in Israel with all its dryness than live in Babylon in exile. Or it could mean we're tempted. Look at all this water, but we're not, nevertheless, we're not impressed by the amount of water. We're not impressed by the amount of beauty. We wish we were back in the land we came from. You ever moved? Especially when you're a child, and the first thing you feel is homesick, and you wish you were back home. And it doesn't matter whether the new home is nice or not. You feel homesick. And that's the way this psalmist feels. I don't care you got more water than we do. I wish I were home. By the way, it's in the plural. He's speaking on behalf of the people around him. Sham yashavnu gam bachinu. There we sat and there we cried. Gum doesn't mean also here. Gum means indeed we cried. It may have been in the past tense, so maybe it was written 5 years later, 10 years later, or even after they came back. And they're looking back over what the experience they had when they were in Babylon. On the willow tree, we hung up our lyres. I think our harps are some kind, I don't know what a lyre is. Anybody know? Some kind of a string instrument, my wife says. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. They hung up their string instruments, either to hide them or because they don't want them. They don't even need them. We're not going to play music here. Maybe these were the members of the temple choir or the temple orchestra. They hang up their harps and say, we ain't going to sing anymore. How can we sing God's song in a foreign land? The word willows captures an echo of Sukkot. Sukkot was when they used to march around the temple carrying the estrog and the lulav and the willow. So it was just another shtrach, another reminder of the good old days. Or it may have been a reminder of Simchat Beit HaShoeva. The seventh day of Sukkot was a glorious day in the time of the temple when they stayed up all night singing and dancing. And now, never, look where we are. The word Holalnu, they mocked us, they teased us. It's a rare word. It's never, I don't think it's found anywhere else in the Bible. So we can only guess what it means. Judging by context, probably means they made fun of us, or they mocked us, or they teased us. But there's no coincidence. Halinu in the last verse, Tolalnu in this verse. Halinu, Tolalnu. One verse is an echo of the other. Now they say, entertain us, sing us from the songs of Zion. What do they call these songs? They say, how can we sing the songs of the Lord? For them, these are not songs of Zion. These are holy songs. These are songs we sang in the temple. How can we sing them here in a foreign land? Look, they call them songs of Zion, the enemy. We call them songs of God. And starting with verse 5, they take an oath. What happens when you take an oath? You swear, usually in court. Remember, you put your hand on the Bible and you raise your right hand. Usually you raise your right hand because that's the stronger hand. And what do you usually say in an oath? In court today, you just say, I promise I'll tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, and only the truth, whatever the three phrases are. But what did it mean when they took an oath? You hear people do it to this day. On my mother's grave. You ever hear that one? Or some phrase like that. It means if I break my oath, may such and such terrible thing happen to me or to my mother or usually to me. I mean, on my eyes or on my life, may I keep this oath. If I break this oath, something terrible happen to me. And so that's what he says here. He says, may two things happen to me if I break this oath. I'm swearing I'm going to remember Jerusalem. If I forget Jerusalem, may both these two terrible things happen to me. Number one, may my right hand become paralyzed. That's really what it means. May my right hand, which is my strong hand, which is the hand I play the harp on, which is the hand that I need the most of the two hands. May my right hand freeze. May it become paralyzed. May not be able to use it for anything. And above all, I can't use it to play the harp. The harp is played with the right hand. It's like a guitar. If you don't have a right hand, you can't play it. The Jewish legend says they cut off their thumbs so that they wouldn't be able to play the thumbs when the tormentors wanted them to. Anyway, if you lose your right hand, you can't play any instrument that depends upon the right hand. Is that clear? So, second curse, if I don't place Jerusalem over my chiefest, greatest joy, let my tongue freeze. Let my tongue freeze to the top of my mouth, the roof of my mouth. What happens if you can't use your tongue?
Talk.
Yeah, you can't talk and you can't sing. So they're bringing a curse on themselves. If I break this oath, let me be unable to speak and let me be unable to sing. Now I'll remind you where you may have heard it. What do we do at the end of a wedding? What do we do at the end of a wedding? It's not a hard question.
Break the glass.
Break your glass. Why? Because the wedding is the moment of your greatest joy in life. It's a wonderful day in your life. And you break the glass to remember Jerusalem's destruction on the day of your greatest joy. You are literally fulfilling this verse. And in some Orthodox synagogues, I have heard the cantor or somebody sing this verse while the glass is being broken or just before the glass is being broken. It's a reminder of Jerusalem by a refugee we put it at the time of our greatest joy. I think of it today as the song of the refugees, of the homesick refugees. I think we have probably never, that I know of, in the history of the world, had as many refugees as we have today. We have homeless people who have risked their lives to cross the Adriatic, to go from Africa to Greece, to go from Venezuela to Mexico to America, to go from Russia to Israel. We have literally millions of homeless people. And I think this is their song. No matter how much they love Israel, no matter how much they love America, something in them misses the old country. My parents lived in America twice as long as they lived in Europe. They came in their 20s, they died in their 80s. And yet, whenever they talked about Poland, they used to say to each other, in the Heim. In the Heim, we used to do it this way, at home. The land that you live in for your first 20 years, that's your home. You never get over that. You can move to a better country, as they did. You can move and stay in this. You know that there are Jews in Russia, in Israel, who go back to Russia. It seems hard for us to believe, but they go back to Russia because they're homesick. It's got a whole new language you got to learn in Israel, a whole new way of doing things, a whole new way of living. I know how to live in the old country. It may be anti-Semitic, it may be poor, but nevertheless, at least it's my home. And so this is the song of the homeless people. This is the song of the refugees. Now we come to verses 7 to 9. And I'm going to give you 4 different comments on it. One that comes from a conservative rabbi who lives in California. One that comes from a Jewish Bible scholar who lives in North Carolina. One who comes from one of the church fathers who lived in Syria. And one that comes from a Christian minister who lived in the 1870s in the Southland of America. And they're all very, very, very different. It's amazing how 4 people can look at the same line and learn 4 different lessons from it. First, why are they mad at Edom? Why? The Babylonians destroyed them. Why are they mad at Edom? Edom is the country next door. Today it's Jordan. And when, according to the Bible, when Babylon came and destroyed Israel or Palestine, the people of Edom stood on the sidelines on the other side of the Jordan and cheered and said, hooray, do it more, give them more, give them more. And you know why that hurt? Because Edom is descended, at least according to Jewish tradition, from Esau. And Esau is the brother of Jacob. It's bad enough when a stranger hurts you. When your own brother hurts you, that's a betrayal. In the book of Devarim, God says to Moses, you're getting close to the land of Israel. In order to get there, you can go the short way or the long way. You can go across the land of Edom, across Jordan, or you can skirt around it and go by way of Jericho. I'm telling you, you want to go by Edom, all right, on one condition. Number 1, ask his permission. Number 2, don't take anything as you go through the land of Edom. My temptation, you're on a long walk, you pull down a fruit and you nash. Don't do that. And number 3, if you need water or if you need food, you can buy it from the people of Edom. You're not allowed to take it. Why? Because they are your kin. They are your relatives, and you don't mistreat a relative. 3 times in the book of Devarim, the Israelites are told if they end up going around, they go by way of Jericho. If you go to the land of Edom, don't take anything without paying for it, because they are your relatives. And now in the year 586, Edom stands across the Jordan and says, hooray that you're killing the Israelites. Do more, tear that temple down, raise it to the very ground. And you do that, you're relatives, you're my family. I don't care, it's bad enough when other people attack me, but my own relatives, shame on you. So verse 7 is an attack on Edom because they didn't do anything, but they cheered. And if you're a relative, you're not supposed to cheer when your kinsman is in trouble. Now comes verse 8 and 9. Eddie Feinstein is a conservative rabbi in California. He has a brilliant interpretation. I don't know if he's right or not, but he has a brilliant interpretation of this lie. He says the Babylonians said, come on already, sing us one of the songs of Zion. They said, okay, if you insist, we'll sing you one of the songs of Zion. The Babylons, according to him, I don't know if this is right or not, didn't know Hebrew. So they sang them this song, oh, a doodle. Oh, may God strike down the heads of your children. May God wipe out the enemy of the Babylonians. May God take their children's heads and bash them against the wall. Hey, and the Babylons don't know what they're singing, so they sing it too. And they clap their hands and they're enjoying it. And they don't know that it's a curse on them. The brilliant explanation. Hi diddle diddle dee, hi diddle diddle dee dum. May God break the heads of your children. That's a brilliant explanation. I have no idea whether it's right or not. There's a Jewish Bible scholar who used to teach at Brandeis and now teaches at North Carolina at Duke. And he comes to this verse. And he says something remarkable. He says, I hate this verse. I can't stand this verse. If it were up to me, I would take it out of the book of Psalms. If it were up to me, I would take the whole book of Psalms out of the Bible, if necessary, in order to get rid of this verse. That seems to be a little bit exaggerated. It's a terrible verse. That's a terrible verse. Take it out of the Bible. Take the whole book of, that's, I think, to be going overboard. But that's what he says. Then there's a Christian church father, I think his name was John Chrysanthemos, but I'm not sure, who lived in Syria and who lived in the 4th century. And he's got a wonderful comment, wonderful in quotes, on this passage. He says, this is the way the Israelites were. They were bloody and vengeful and full of hatred until Jesus Christ, our Savior, came along and taught them to be kind and compassionate. Hear that? This is the way the Jews were. They were vengeful and cruel and full of hatred until Jesus Christ came along and taught them to be better. Come on. Is that true? That's a terrible, terrible, offensive, ugly misinterpretation of this verse. Truth is, let me digress for a minute, that the Jews are remarkable in how few cries for vengeance there are. Considering how much sorrows the Jews went through in their history, it is remarkable that there are hardly any cries for vengeance in the Jewish prayer book. Can you name them? I can only think of 2 besides this one. One's easy, I'll tell you right away.
Amalek.
What?
Amalek.
Amalek. Good, I forgot that one. 3. But Amalek is not in the Siddur. Amalek is not in the liturgy. It is recited in the prayer in the Bible, recited in the Torah. Okay, what kind of Amalek? There are 2 others. One is easy. What do you do with the Seder? At the beginning of the second half of the Seder, you open the door for Elijah, and what do you say? Shpoch talmatcha ala goyim, asher lo yida'ucha, v'olam ha'malchot, asher b'shimcha lo kara'u, hi'achlo et Yaakov, v'naveu hishama. Pour out your anger, pour out your wrath upon the nations, not all the nations, on those nations that do not know you, that do not recognize you, and on those kingdoms that do not accept your legitimacy, because they have consumed Jacob, and they have destroyed his home. Why did they say that before the beginning of the second Seder, half of the Seder? Anybody? Because it was not infrequent in the Middle Ages. Pesach and Easter always come out together. The calendar is so arranged, they have to be within 21 days of each other. Sometimes Easter would come out first. And the Christians were illiterate. They didn't know how to read, but they had pictures. That's why you have stained glass in churches and not in synagogues, or now you have in synagogues too. But the reason you had them in stained glass is people couldn't read. They could see the story. The story was in the pictures. But the priests would give sermons. And in those sermons, they would blame the Jews for the killing of Jesus Christ. And as a result, Christians would come out on Easter, full of anger at what they had heard in church, and they would go home and drink. And then that night, either inflamed by the sermon or inflamed by the liquor, they would bust into Jewish houses and pillage them and burn them. And they would be told in these sermons that the Jews make matzah out of the blood of Christian children. That was what they believed. It's such a nonsensical belief. Jews don't drink blood. Jews don't eat blood. Jews drain blood before they eat anything. How could you believe that about Jews? But they did. And therefore they would pillage Jewish houses and spoil the Seder. And when they left, Jews would say, pour out your wrath, not upon all Gentiles, upon those Gentiles who don't recognize you, upon those nations that don't accept your teaching. Because look what they just did. They destroyed our house and they pillaged our dwelling. And then they would sing Eliyahu Navi. Why? Eliyahu Navi comes before the Messiah and promises a better world, a world in which people will get along in peace, a world in which people will respect each other. So that's how, in the Middle Ages, that's the one of the two verses that we have. How do we handle it today? I'll tell you two examples of how we handle. One is the new conservative Haggadah. You know how the new conservative Haggadah handles it? It says it. You can't leave it out. It's part of Jewish history. And then it adds the new prayer. And the new prayer is Shpoch Ahavatcha ala goyim asher yaducha. Pour out your love upon those nations, the non-Jews who do know you, and upon those non-Jews who do recognize your authority, because they're saving Jacob and they are protecting his home. It's a tribute to those non-Jews. There weren't many, but there were some who risked their lives to save Jews. You know, when you go into Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, and you've ever been there, at the entrance is a garden. It's called the Gan of Tzaddik Olam Tzaddik Haolam. It's a garden in honor of the righteous non-Jews from Poland and France and Belgium and Russia and elsewhere who risked their lives to save Jews. And don't be cynical and tell me, oh, there were hardly any. First of all, there were some. And second of all, I don't know what I would do. Would I risk my life and the lives of my children? Because if you got caught saving a Jew, you could get killed. Would I really risk my life and the life of my family in order to save Jews? Until you're there, you can't say. It's easy to sit in judgment from here. But that's the way the conservative movement handled it. We keep the old version, pour out your wrath upon the wicked non-Jews, and we add a new additional version, pour out your love upon those who do love you and who do risk their lives to help your people. Do you like that compromise? How many of you like that compromise and think that's a good compromise? Okay, let me show you one more effort to deal with this. In 1943, the Reconstructionists published a new Haggadah. They said, we live in America. America's a free country. America's a land where everybody gets along. America's a land in which there is no anti-Semitism. And therefore, we can't say pour out your wrath anymore. And they took it out. I remember I once asked Dr. Heschel what he thought of that book. And he said to me, were there any other words that were more literally appropriate for Jews to say in 1943 when they were piled into cattle cars and railroad cars and taken to Auschwitz? Pour out your wrath upon those nations. Were there any words more appropriate? The blindness, forgive me for saying so, of Dr. Kaplan was he only looked at America. I think he may have even been too optimistic about America. He thought anti-Semitism was over. But even if he was right about America, what about Europe? So that's a second way of dealing with the passage, pour out your wrath. On Seder night, I hope you'll remember these two ways and choose one of them to include in your Seder. I see Vicky's here, good. Hello, Vicky. Third passage. There's one other passage in the Amidah. Who knows it? In the Amidah, it says, "Ulemalshinim al tehi tikva." Let there be no hope for the betrayers. For those Jews who reveal hidden Jews, secret Jews, supposedly converted Jews to others. During the Inquisition, some Jews left and some Jews stayed. Some Jews pretended to convert, but secretly in their own houses, when nobody was looking, they would light candles or avoid pork or do things that were still Jewish. But if there were some Jewish betrayers who pulled on these people to the Inquisition and got them killed. And that's the only group that is cursed in the Amidah. Let them have no hope. I think they had no hope. Otherwise, they wouldn't have done that. They thought this is the only choice we have, the only way it's always going to be. Remember the story of Barbadell? I'll tell it to you later, another time maybe. Barbadell was the prime minister of two countries, Spain and Portugal, treasurer of Spain and treasurer of Portugal. When it came the Inquisition, they had to leave. And the king called him in, King of Spain. Said, I'll make you a deal. I'll give you anything and everything that you want, and I'll give you everything and anything that you haven't even the imagination to think of. I will make you a trillionaire. I will make a prime minister. I will build you a royal house as good as mine, etc., etc., etc. If you don't leave. Only one condition. You got to convert. I don't know what you would say if they made you an offer like that, but he said, no, thank you, but no, thank you. I said, why? I'm offering you the world. Why are you not doing it? He says, if I get an order from a king, and at the same time get an order from a sergeant or a corporal, who do I listen to? I listen to the king. My king is God. God said you don't convert. How can I listen to you? And for an hour, according to the history books, he explained to the king what Judaism stood for and why he had to go. And I wish I were a fly on the wall and could have heard that talk. He goes to Portugal, rises to the top again, becomes Secretary of State, I think, or Treasurer of Portugal, and the same thing happens, and he has to go off into exile. But both times he chose God over success. So the betrayers are not to be admired. They're ghouls that have the courage of, um, anyway, that's the, oh, have I got all four? Oh, I left out what I think is the most important one. Back in the 1870s in the Southland in America, there were a lot of small towns and there were a lot of farms. And there were a lot of people who didn't know how to read or write, but they would go to church every Sunday. They would either go to mass if they were Catholics, or they would go to church if they were Protestants, and they had no minister. How many ministers could they have for all these small, tiny churches? You have a church of 15 families. How can you have a full-time minister? So they had what they called lay ministers. Lay ministers would preach every week. The only problem was the lay ministers didn't know anything. Maybe they could read if the print was big enough and if the words were easy enough, but they didn't know anything. So a minister named Spurgeon would send out every week to these little towns, I guess by telegram or what, I don't know how he did it. Eventually they became a book. He would send out a sermon outline for the minister to read. No rabbi today would read somebody else's outline, I'm sure. Couldn't happen, but that's what they did back then. Spurgeon would send out a note, an outline page, and they would, these lay ministers who didn't know much, would read or embellish or expand or just read what they were sent. And they came to Psalm 137. In those days, it was still part of the Protestant service. I don't think it is today. And what should Spurgeon write? What should Spurgeon write? Hate the Babylonians, or hate the Jews for saying that the heads of the Babylonian children should be smashed against the walls, the rocks? What should Spurgeon write? He writes a wonderful line. He says, all those of you ministers who have never seen your wives raped before your eyes, and who have never seen your children murdered before your eyes, and who have never seen your churches burnt to the ground before your eyes, have no right to judge the Jews. That's what they saw. Do you blame them for cursing? Wouldn't you? Those of you who have seen these things have a right to judge them. If they were hateful and you were not, you can say, bad people. But you and I have never gone through what those Jews went through. How can we judge them? I think that's a wonderful comment and it fits for all of us. Let me give you a modern example. All of us know Holocaust survivors. Everybody here has met a Holocaust survivor. Some of them are broken people who rebuilt their lives. Some of them are people who came out and remained, not only remained kind and compassionate, but really reached out to help make this a better world. But there are some Holocaust survivors, I'm sure you know them, I do, who are bitter people, who can't stop cursing the Germans. The Nazis are dead long already, and yet they can't stop cursing the Nazis. They wouldn't buy a German car if it was for free. They marched in front of the Knesset with Begin when the parliament voted to accept reparations from Germany. Even though that was needed, the money was needed desperately by Israel. You can't take blood money. How are you going to put a price on the worth of my mother's life? Have you met such people, bitter people, angry people, nasty people, people who can't speak respectfully of Goyim or Nazis or Germans? I have. I know some people who, whenever they hear the word Goyim, say something derogatory, right? What shall we say about such people? Understandable. Look what they went through. I didn't go through what they went through. I have no right to sit in judgment on them. I mean, I don't think they're right. I think there's such a thing as, what do they call it in law? When the statute of limitations. Thank you. There's the statute, thank you very much. Statute of, yes, right. Statute of limitations. There's time to give up hating. It doesn't do you any good, it doesn't do them any good. There's a time to give up hating. But when? And can you? Some of us can and some of us can't. And so I think that we are to respect those people who can't, feel sorry for them, but understand them if they can't forgive. So now we've learned Psalm 137, which is the toughest of all the Psalms to learn. If we can get this one through and find it meaningful, the rest will be easy. We're going to do 27, which is an interesting Psalm, which deals with the question, can you believe and yet have doubts? Can you believe and yet have doubts? Have you ever had that experience?
All right, Rabbi, if I let you keep going, you're going to go on to number 27 and we'll be listening to the
No,
whole
I
thing.
won't.
You've got to
No,
save
I-
something.
Oh, give me a minute. Give me a minute. We're going to do Psalm 23. How can you not? We're going to do a number of other, we're going to do Ashrei, because everybody knows or thinks they know something, they know Ashrei. But I quit here. Can we let everybody introduce themselves?
If they'd like to,
Yeah, Elliot, start with you.
I'm going to get
Who
a
are you?
gallery view.
Elliot,
Hi, everybody. I'm Elliot Burns.
and where do you
and I
live?
am a- And I am a groupie of Rabbi Riemer, and we
Just wait.
appreciate so much.
You- And you
having
live in Boca, okay. Frank? You have to unmute. You have to unmute, and no compliments, just where do you live?
Miami, Florida. I was born here, raised here. I'm happy in my ignorance here, and I'm staying.
Okay, Ivy and Bill?
We live in Boca. We were born in other places and moved many places, but I agree. I'm staying here and I'm happy here.
Elaine? Elaine Sharp? Where are you from? Unmute. Can you unmute, Elaine?
Yeah, well, I'm from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan.
Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada. Alvin? Okay,
I'm from Bloomington, Indiana.
yeah. Lois?
Montreal.
Montreal. Harold? Harold? Unmute. Harold Katz, unmute. Where are you from?
I come from Connecticut.
Connecticut. Interesting. Nobody's born in Florida. Everybody comes from somewhere else. Maryland? Maryland Quartz? Unmute.
Born in the Bronx, and I'm in Stamford, Connecticut.
Now in Stamford, Connecticut. Look how many times people moved today. So, Alvin, I know it's from Philadelphia, now in Indiana. So,
I'm from Philadelphia and I used to read your columns in the Jewish Exponent,
and now where do you live?
Delray Beach.
Delray Beach. Dale and Richard?
From Long Island and now permanent residents of Boca.
Okay. Helene? Helene Jensen, unmute.
Chicago, and I'm just sitting next to you on Shabbat morning.
Chicago, now Boca. Sandra?
Montreal, and I live north of Toronto in Canada.
Montreal. Honey Pine?
Honey and Henry Pine, we were born in Brooklyn. Right now, we're talking to you from Comac, New York. We're new Snowbird members of B'nai Torah, and December 1st, we'll be there.
Okay. Stella?
It's in the drawer if you need it.
Stella? Unmute. Marilyn?
Gilla?
Marilyn, unmute. Rebecca,
He's got a hand up.
Cliff, yes.
Go ahead, Marilyn. Okay, Rebecca.
Rebecca,
Harold.
Honey Pine, we got already. Cynthia Ostrovsky.
Cynthia Ostrovsky from Munster, Indiana.
Munster, Indiana.
It's- I
Cindy
just-
Aaronson. Devorah. Unmute everybody, please.
Where's from
Devorah,
Ontario?
Cindy Aaronson,
I'm from Mount Clemens, Michigan, and I
Mount,
hear.
we have a
Mount-
lot of Michiganers here. It's Mount Clemens. Okay. Next, Barbara Epstein. Unmute.
Wanto, New York, Long Island.
Long Island. Toby Schulman.
Montreal.
Montreal. Look what a spread we have. I must say, the Jews are a moving people. And how many, I bet nobody, very few people live in the same state or the same state of mind as their parents or their children. Really, seriously, that's why we have psychiatrists. Used to be, you had a problem, you went down the street to your aunt's house, and she was a wise woman, and she gave you advice. Today, your aunt lives in Montreal and you live in Tennessee, so you have to go to a shrink. Anybody else? I saw the Harlow somewhere. Harlow,
Heather Ellison,
yes,
Toronto,
Hmm.
Ontario, Canada.
good. Barbara Epstein. Toby Schulman. Didn't I see the Harlows? I think that's all I see. The others may have
What
gone.
about you, Rabbi?
I'm from Pittsburgh and now here, and you want to introduce yourself? Where are you from?
I'm from Jamaica, New York, and now from Boca.
And my wife over here who teaches me everything I know, and with how to make less than nothing, is from Jamaica and then Newark and now Boca. Anybody else?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rabbi. It was a wonderful, wonderful session and we all learned so much.
Tune in next week.
And
Look
we'll be
at
back
Psalm
again next week.
for Psalm 27 and then 23.
Thank
Okay.
you, thank you, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.